I am absolutely delighted to welcome Ian Fure, Managing Partner with Fure, Harrington and Partners, a global architectural firm with their head office in Waterford City. Ian, welcome.
Thank you, Regina. We're delighted to be here this morning with you.
Great. Ian, tell me, before we crack on and talk about the important topic of planning permission, are you busy right now?
Yes, we're extremely busy right now with various schemes across Ireland, from residential to healthcare to commercial developments.
Great. So we're talking to the best. I know that already. Ian, can I ask you, for the purpose of people who are going to be watching this afterwards, what does outline planning permission actually mean?
Outline planning permission is when a client wishes to determine if they will be able to apply for a residential planning on a rural site or any site. And it will merely, it doesn't necessarily give you planning to move forward, but it will generate that the planning authorities will allow you to go for planning for a house or a commercial building.
Okay, and let's just say that Mary was going to see if she could get planning permission for her site in Stradbally. Who would she phone up to take her through the whole process? Like, is it an architect? Is it only an architect, or do you need an engineer as well?
No, I suppose it would be an architect. I suppose our profession is there to assist, I suppose, clients with any queries that they have regarding the kind of the built environment, whether it's housing or commercial properties as well. So it really is to contact an architect, and they will kind of guide you through that process and advise you. Effectively, an architect is your advisor to bring you through that, your house or a commercial property. Yeah.
From start to finish. That's absolutely brilliant. Tell me this, Ian. Mary now has bought a site in Stradbally, and what would happen if if her application for her home, to build her home, was refused? Is there anything she could do about that?
Well, I suppose the first thing that if Mary didn't have an architect before, or did it another way is to really contact an architect or a planner to advise them, I suppose, of that refusal. When you get a refusal from the planning authorities, they list out why they've refused the application, and that's really going through the conditions why they refuse the application, and it's different in many different scenarios. So it's really to contact either an architect or a planner, and then they will advise you how to make a suitable response.
Ian, can I ask you, in terms of your experience, what were the two top reasons why people's residential planning permission was turned down?
In maybe in rural areas, it's normally down to kind of housing need, possibly, but normally you have to establish that housing need prior to lodging the application. Normally it might be about the design or visual impact of the house, or the character or the design of the house. So obviously planning authorities are kind of would be against kind of putting like red brick houses in the countryside. And it would need to follow kind of the guidelines that they've set out for designing houses in the countryside.
So in other words, sorry, I beg your pardon. So in other words, Ian, if somebody's refused planning, they look at the reasons, and no doesn't always mean no. There just might be an alternative way of building.
Correct. Yeah. And sorry, it may be down to like services. You need percolation tests, maybe lack of information at the time when you submitted the application. Yeah.
Great. And obviously, if you hire an expert like yourselves, that shouldn't happen in the first place. What do you need to do to get planning permission to build a house on a site? Kind of what are the simple, I won't say simple steps, but the main steps?
Well, as I said to you, I suppose the first step is obviously to appoint an architect to kind of bring you through that process. Once you've appointed an architect, the architect will kind of maybe give you advice in terms of how to proceed the next steps, in terms of doing up maybe a concept design with yourselves, arranging a pre-planning meeting with the local authority, which is very important to get any of the local authorities' concerns on board. and then the architect would also kind of let you know about other consultants that you may need or require, other information you'll have to require to make a planning application. So it is, it's a relatively straightforward process in terms of doing kind of residential kind of one-off houses. I suppose the difficulties lie is in terms of the site locations and the particular location where you're developing, and making sure that the planning authorities are in agreement with that. The other thing that to be aware of is kind of third-party objectors in your area that can also cause issues for many houses where you may have neighbors that are in disagreement of you having a house in that location as well, that causes issues.
Is there any practical things that you could suggest maybe for people to do just to combat that? Is that realistic?
Normally it's when you go for planning, you may know your neighbors, and maybe to have discussions with your neighbors to let them know what you're doing if you have good relationships, and also just to inform them what's happening in many cases. So that's what we would normally advise, you know.
Yeah, a little chat can go a long way to kind of maybe reassure people. We hear a lot about properties for sale, or should I say sites for sale with the local need. And we recently had a property on the market in Stradbally, a site for sale, a 1 acre, and it is subject to planning, subject to a local need. And I had people from the north of Ireland and the UK looking to purchase the site, but I explained, no, I'm sorry. There does actually have to be local need. And now we have a buyer who's from the area. You might talk a little bit about that, please, Ian.
Yeah, I suppose with the planning regulations across Ireland, I suppose that at the national level, they're really focusing that they want people to live within urban centres, towns, villages, cities. So really, to build a house in a rural environment, you really need to conform to the criteria, the housing need criteria, which really kind of sets it out for that you have to be from the area, or you're the daughter of a farmer, or so on, right? So if you don't fit within that criteria, unfortunately, it does preclude you from going for planning, right? So it is a difficult one, but at the same time is that there is, every site is particularly kind of, and the local authorities can take a different perspective on it at times. But normally, as I said, in rural sites, you really need to kind of conform to the guidelines that are set out.
Great. Is there a particular website that you would recommend for people to check out in terms of local need housing?
Yeah, well, every local authority have their own kind of guidance on this. So in Waterford, they have, if you type in housing need, local housing need in rural settings, if you type that in, it'll actually pop up straight away in your Google search for Waterford. So what I will do is I'll provide you with a link to this that will bring you directly to the page, which explains all about that. Yeah.
Super, that's great. We've been talking for nearly 10 minutes, would you believe it, Ian? So I want to get through a couple of very quick points, please. Do you need planning permission to extend on an existing property?
You do need planning to extend once. I suppose maybe the question is what don't you need planning for? I suppose more so. So at the
we'd say residential.
So for residential. So so you're allowed to not go for planning if your extension is less than 40 square meters at the rear of your house. So a single story extension is at the rear of the house. If you make any modifications to the front or side of your house, you will require planning. So it's for extensions off the back of your house, 1 story, and then there is a criteria if you want to go 2 story in terms of the areas that you're allowed to extend without planning. But in every other instance, you will require planning for an extension of your house.
Okay, that's super. Ian, we've actually run out of time. I could talk to you for hours about this. We're going to put a link up to the local needs information and to Fiora Harrington if anyone is looking for professional architectural services. Ian, thank you so much, Curve. Mila Mahakut.
Thank you, Regina. It's been a pleasure.